Shalom, my dear friends, and good Erev Shabbat. I begin my sermon this week with a short story, a story that you yourself may have witnessed. It's about the gentleman sitting in a restaurant on Main Street on a mild summer day. He calls the waitress over and says, "Young lady, it's too hot in this place. Please turn on the air conditioning. It's unbearable." The waitress looks at him and says, "Yes, of course." A few minutes later, the same gentleman calls the same waitress over and says, "Hey, young lady, it's too cold in here. Please have them turn off the air conditioning." The young waitress patiently looks at him and says, "Yes, of course." Within 10 minutes, again, the same gentleman calls the same waitress and says to her, "Young lady, it's unbearably hot in here. Please turn on the air conditioning." The waitress patiently looks at him and says, "Yes, of course, no problem." As she walks away, a young couple having lunch next to the gentleman stops the waitress and says to her, "That man is so annoying. You must be so frustrated." She looks at them and says, "It's okay. This establishment doesn't have an air conditioner." I share this story to illustrate a truth about our human condition. We, my friends, create our own reality. Here we are on lockdown, in our homes. What we make of this experience is completely and totally up to us. And we learn this message from the tiniest of items described in this week's Perashat. In the midst of the many laws associated with korbanot, the sacrifices, Hashem invokes the Berit Melach, the covenant of salt. Yes, you heard correctly. All the sacrifices required salt. As the Pasuk states in the beginning of last week's Perashat, all gift offerings must have salt, and the Torah reiterates that all offerings, all korbanot, must be presented with Berit Melach, the covenant of salt. Salt has always been an important ingredient. Permit me two rabbinic comments about salt. The first is from the Gemara Masechet Berachot, Daf Lamed Daled Amud Aleph, page 34, side A. The Talmud states that three things in this world are best with less and worst with more. The first is yeast. You put too much yeast in your dough and you will get the opposite effect you wanted. Too much yeast will actually flatten your dough. Just a touch of yeast, the right amount, will make the dough rise and make your bread beautiful. The second is salt. Too much salt will ruin your food. Just the right amount of salt will make it tasty and perfect. You want to know the third thing that is best with less and worst with more? The Talmud says sarbanut. The English Talmud translates that as refusals, turning things down. The Persian community actually has a perfect word for this. It is Tarof. The Talmud says, too much Tarof is no good. A little Tarof is perfect and respectful. For those of you who want to learn more about Tarof, just Google Tarof, New York Times. I reference you to an article published around 2006 titled something like "The Fine Art of Hiding What You Really Want." And the article will explain Tarof. The second passage in the Talmud about salt is in the Yerushalmi. The sages tell us the world can survive without pepper, but it cannot survive without salt. What is it about salt that our sages teach the world cannot survive without it? Why is salt used to seal the covenant between Hashem and the Jewish people? More than that, Salt keeps coming up throughout Tanakh in various contexts. Lot's wife turns into a pillar of salt after she looks back on the destruction of Sodom and Amorah. Elisha the prophet heals a putrid body of water by putting salt into it. Imagine, the water is already bad, and Elisha uses salt to cleanse it. In the book of Divrei Hayamim, Hashem seals his covenant with King David and his progeny with salt. Berit Melach. Here's an interesting etymology. The word salary, a word on many of our minds these days, actually comes from the word sal, which means salt in Latin. In the ancient days, it was not uncommon to be paid with salt. It was a valuable commodity in the ancient world. Rashi, intrigued as we are by the ingredient in the sacrifices, introduces a sweet midrash. Salt, of course, comes from the sea, the ocean. Rashi tells us when Hashem separated the heavenly waters and the earthly waters, the oceans were jealous. They too wanted to be in the heavens. So Hashem says, I promise you to the oceans, salt will be placed on all the korbanot, all the sacrifices. So the oceans too will be close to heaven. Ibn Ezra attempts something more literal and suggests that salt just made the korbanot taste better. And it is our duty to only present the best before God and to the Kohanim. No one wants to eat bland food. Rambam Maimonides has a very different take on the salt that was brought to the altar before Hashem. He argues in the Moreh Nevuchim that salt distinguished the Jewish people from the world of idol worshippers. Salt is drawn out from the water, and salt also draws out that which is bad. Salt is used to draw out the blood from meat. This is why Elisha used salt to heal the water. He used the salt in order to draw out the bad and the putrid from the water. Salt is a natural preservative. In the ancient days, it was used to preserve meat and fruits. Salt is also enduring. There's a permanence to it that defies time and defies the process of decomposition. Herein, my friends, lies three elements that forge our relationship with Hashem. And it is that relationship that ultimately creates our reality. Berit Melach means a covenant of salt. A covenant is a two-way street. It's a relationship that goes both ways. Both sides have to be engaged. Like salt, Hashem heals and purifies the spirit. Our emunah, our trust in Hashem, is what keeps us going. It is our anchor. My mother of blessed memory always said, this too will pass. Have emunah in Hashem. We too have to earn Hashem's trust. We have to be a healing force in the world around us. Like salt, wrapping ourselves in our love of Hashem and Hashem's trust creates for us a spiritual preservative. While everything around us seems to be falling apart, we are wrapped in Hashem's arms. We too have to embrace the world around us with goodness and kindness. Finally, like salt, which endures for a very long time, forever maybe, Hashem's love of us is infinite and enduring. We too, my friends, have to be strong, both physically and mentally. The reality we create around us depends solely on us. Shabbat Shalom